Hi friends, in this video I'm going to engage you on variation as a topic and also teach you on the types of variation with their respective meaning and how it could be seen in real life situation. Let me begin with what a variation is. A variation simply means a relationship that exists between two or more quantities. Whenever we have a relationship that exists between two or more quantities, we can refer it as variation. And mathematically, we have up to 4 types of variation. The first type of variation is the direct variation. The second type is the inverse variation. The third type of variation is what we call joint variation. And the last one is partial variation. In this video, I'm going to be explaining what each of these type of variation means and how it could be viewed in real life situation. Hence, I'm starting with the first type of variation, which is direct variation. What is a direct variation? In direct variation, there is a relationship between two quantities only. There is a relationship, remember, between two quantities only. That means the increase in one of the other quantity results to a corresponding increase in the other quantity. Let's view it in real life situation. For a motorcyclist that is riding a motorcycle, the higher the motorcyclist increase the throttle of the motorcycle, the higher the speed of the motorcycle. That is what we call or refer to as direct variation, because the increase in one of the quantity, which is the throttle of the motorcycle, will result to the corresponding increase in the speed of the motorcycle. That is what we call direct variation. Now, in symbol, we can say that y is directly proportional to x. Whenever you see a relationship like this, you can interpret it in this manner, that your y is directly proportional to x. And to remove this very proportionality symbol, you have to introduce constant by saying that y is equal to constant x. Hence, we succeeded in removing this proportionality symbol. Remember, to read this means that your y is directly proportional to your x. And to remove this proportionality sign, you put equal to and introduce a constant. The next one is the inverse variation. What is inverse variation? It is the relationship that exists between two quantities. And now the increase in one of the quantities results to the corresponding decrease in the other quantity. Remember, in direct variation, the increase in one of the quantity, which is quantity y, results to corresponding increase in the other quantity. But in inverse variation, the increase in one of the quantity results to the corresponding decrease in the other quantity. So if we have an expression of the form that y is inversely proportional to x, so we can easily interpret this as y is inversely proportional to x. So that means the increase in y, that is the quantity y, will result to the corresponding decrease in the quantity x. Inversely, we can also say that the decrease in the quantity x will result to the increase in quantity y. So what is the difference between direct variation and inverse variation? For direct variation, the increase in one of the quantity results to the corresponding increase in the other quantity. But in inverse variation, the increase in one of the quantity results to the decrease in the other quantity. So that is how you can show contrast between direct variation and inverse variation. Now let's go to the third part of the variation. The third type of variation is joint variation. Now, what is joint variation? Joint variation tells us of the relationship that exists between two or more quantities. Remember, in direct variation is a relationship that exists between two quantities only. The same thing with inverse variation is a relationship that exists between two quantities also. Looking at the two quantities, they are the x and the y respectively. And in direct, the x and the y respectively also. But in joint variation, it is more than two quantities. That means we should have up to 3 quantities in joint variation. Now, in joint variation, the expression is usually in this form. Now, if you're asked to interpret this very expression, how do you interpret it? Actually, in the real sense, this should be of this form, that y is directly proportional to x and inversely proportional to z. But when x multiplying 1, we automatically have x all over z. So that's why I put it directly in this form. So remember, in joint variation, there is a relationship that exists between two or more quantities. Looking at here, we have up to two or more quantities, which is up to three quantities. That is quantity x, quantity y, and quantity z, respectively. And a given expression of this form is being read in joint variation as y is directly proportional to x and inversely proportional to z. Now let's go to the last type of variation, which is partial variation. Whenever a variation is expressed as a sum of terms, automatically that type of variation is partial variation. Whenever you see a kind of variation that is being expressed in terms of sum, automatically that type of variation is a partial variation. Let's take an example of it. It is being written in this form. Let's take y is partly constant, and the and is a plus there, and partly directly as, let's take ax. Remember, this is the constant, and this also the a, which is the coefficient of x, is also the constant. So whenever you see partial variation, it is being expressed in this form, and we can read it as y is partly constant and partly directly as x. Remember, the a here means constant and the k here also means constant. We could have put constant for this very k, but knowing that constant multiplying constant is still constant, that is why we just allow it to be a constant. Then coming here also, constant multiplying a variable will still be constant variable. And that is why we have to put constant for this x. So whenever you have a kind of variation of sum, we call it a partial variation. Now remember, in joint variation, it is a relationship that exists between two or more quantities. And sometimes we can say that joint variation is the combination of both direct and inverse variation. Remember, joint variation, sometimes it could be said that it is a combination of both direct and inverse variation. All right, thank you for viewing. Thank you for watching. This is just a succinct introduction based on what variation means and the types of variation. In my subsequent video, I'm going to be uploading the application of different types of variation: direct variation, inverse variation, joint variation, and partial variation. Remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Israeli Man's Concept, so that whenever I upload a new video, you will be notified. Remember also to follow me on Facebook by just typing on your Facebook platform Israeli Online Man's Concept and click on follow. Then you will follow me directly. That whenever I upload a new content, you will be notified. Thank you for viewing. Thank you for watching. See you next time. My regards to you. Goodbye.